is what I'm dealing with, y'all. I'm Airbnb. So don't trust it. Don't do that. Make sure you know exactly who to let into your house because it is some freeloading motherfuckers who would just use you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Build Young, Grow Wealthy podcast. My name is Walida Cherie. In today's podcast episode, my return guest Joseph and I are going to discuss the dark side of Airbnb short-term rentals. Without further ado, let's get into this. For those of you that are first-time listeners to the show, Joseph is my husband and has been in business and multifamily real estate, aka apartment homes greater than 100 units. He worked in single-family homes doing wholesaling prior to going into multifamily, and he studies what goes on in his industry, so I try to have him on the podcast at least once a month for those of you that are interested in building wealth through real estate. Today, we are going to talk about the dark side of Airbnb short-term rentals from the investor or host point of view. So let's get this conversation going. Welcome back to the show, Joseph.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
So I want to ask you, how would you describe what short-term rentals are in real estate?
So, a short term rental in real estate is basically an Airbnb where an investor might go buy either a single family property or condo or townhouse, something of that nature. And then they turn around and they rent it out for maybe a couple of days or so or a week at a time.
So, according to Forbes, Airbnb currently hosts over 7 million listings and is active in more than 100,000 cities across 220 countries and regions. Airbnb is aiming for 1 billion with a B guests annually by 2028. So, how do you feel about those numbers?
I think for short term rental people, it's good, but for the long term rental investors in single family or townhouses, that could actually be a bad thing. Like you could see the end of long term rentals.
So, have you heard of the Airbnb effect?
I have heard of it. I haven't read a whole lot into it.
Okay, well, the Airbnb effect is similar to gentrification because it encourages over tourism and it also decreases the supply of housing, therefore causing rents and mortgages to rise. So that's basically what the Airbnb effect is. So does that kind of ring a bell?
Yes, yeah, I've read something to that tune before.
So then what are your thoughts about the Airbnb effect?
I mean, based off everything that you just put out there and based off what I know of it and how I see it affecting the market, I don't really approve of how it is.
And why is that?
Well, to me, it really affects the consumer. Especially raising the rents in the area. That just makes it tough for a person now to have a place to stay as far as with apartments or even the fact that it's accessible for them to buy single family properties as and turn those into short term rentals as well. I personally don't feel like a person who's buying for the sole purpose of an Airbnb should be able to do that. I don't feel like they should have priority over an actual homeowner when it comes to the single family side of things.
Okay. So you may be onto something because you're not the only one that feels like that. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Airbnb actually was launched in New York City. And today, New York City actually has restrictions on how Airbnb is regulated because of kind of the things you just mentioned. In addition to New York City, you also have cities such as San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and you also have more cities being added to the list, including Atlanta. So in New York, you can't rent out your entire apartment. You must be present if you are the host. If you decide to put your listing up, you have to actually stay in the unit with your guests. You can't have an empty unit. Therefore, you cannot advertise it as an apartment, and you can only have up to 2 paying guests inside of your apartment. More cities have actually joined the list, but lately the latest one is Atlanta. So we are going to talk real quickly about Atlanta. Have you heard anything about that market?
I have heard about Atlanta and how they're regulating the market. Some of the things is that you can only have two and you have to live in one and you have to pay an 8% tax.
And I think it's $150 annually that
Yep.
you'd have to pay towards kind of like your fees. If I'm already invested in say Airbnb properties. The government of Atlanta now has said that I don't have that right. And I heard they're trying to make it where it's considered legacy, where they don't take all of your properties away from you. Also, what I heard is that 4,000 listings are now gone off of Airbnb in Atlanta, meaning that's 4,000 new homes that people can either purchase or 4,000 rentals that long-term renters can now have. So, what do you think about the cities, because it has become an issue for long-term renters and for people buying homes, have now put these restrictions? How does that make you feel to know that you could have houses already invested and now they're going to get taken away from you?
If I'm being honest, that's not a feeling that I necessarily care for. But at the same time, I don't think you would want to hold that many Airbnbs in this upcoming market that we're in. I mean, think about it. If the recession does hit, how many people you know are going to just be trying to stay in essentially a vacation spot?
I mean, that's a good question, but at the same time, because of the rising rents, people are turning to Airbnbs, and all an Airbnb host has to do at that point is lower their rent to be more attractive. Maybe not for vacation, but maybe just to have to live. And I'm going to play you guys a clip of a situation that actually happened where a lady bought a home. She put it on Airbnb for a listing, and she had a tenant who refused to leave because the law says that the tenant is now considered legally binded to the home and the landlord can't get her out. So I'll be playing that clip here.
Yeah, don't trust no Airbnbs. Okay, so I can't even talk right now. I'm so pissed off. Yeah, I didn't even know this shit could happen, but this shit is real. It's really going on. I call myself trying to find a way to pay off my mortgage a little better, a little quicker, or whatever. So I put this ad out or whatever saying I was looking for someone to sublease one of the rooms in my house or whatever. It was supposed to be like this real smooth transaction, whatever. Went on vacation or whatever. The person was supposed to be gone 3 days prior to my return. So I'm talking to my housekeeper or whatever, XYZ. She's like, yo, that person is still here in your house. What do you mean they're still in my house? It's supposed to be gone. So when I get back and touch down in the city, this is still here in my house, okay? Refusing to leave. So I didn't know what to do. I do shit. So I go down and I do up. There you go, y'all. Straight to the kitchen. I ain't going nowhere. On top of her just intruded into my home. She disrespected. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I've been trying to do the right way. I done went down there and got the all the paperwork that I need to do to get her evicted out my house, whatever. But shit is a process. I have to go through protocols and all the other stupid legal blase bull. And then I just got the police just left my house, and I'm like, get this out my house. And they're like, oh, she's a tenant now. She's a tenant. There's you and the police, okay?
My door. That's all I know.
Your door. This is my house. How about you get the out of my house? How about that's what you do? How about you get the out of my house? How about you get the out of my house? How about you get? Sammy, don't shit. Okay, madam.
Shit. Excuse me. Excuse me. You can record all you want. All you want. I ain't going nowhere, okay? So deal with it.
This is what I'm dealing with, y'all. I'm Airbnb. So don't trust it. Don't do that. Make sure you know exactly who the let into your house, because it is some freeloading motherfuckers who would just use you out my house. And then I call the goddamn police and oh, she's a tenant. She's a tenant. This is not no tenant in my house. What do you mean? This is supposed to be gone. That's what she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be gone.
Call the police. Call the police, because I ain't going nowhere. Don't touch that door, or I'm calling the police on you, and they're gonna arrest you.
Call it. Are you smoking in my house? Are you, this?
What are your thoughts about this situation?
That's been happening to long-term rental investors since long-term rental investing has been. So it's not really anything new, but it's new to the person who's the Airbnb host. If they invested conservatively, then they can, weather that storm. You can get the person out depending on what state that you're in. It's a number of factors. So If you didn't invest in a landlord friendly state, then yeah, no. Like that was a bad investment for you. There lies the issue. A lot of these Airbnb hosts, they're not necessarily investing in landlord friendly states. So they have these here Airbnb properties. So if a person does become a squatter, well, see now because you didn't have the same knowledge as the long-term investor or as a person who maybe is in I don't know multifamily, then yeah, you're taking more of an L.
Okay. So you're saying that if you do decide to invest in an Airbnb, it should be in a landlord friendly state. Can you tell us what you mean by landlord friendly state?
So what I mean by a landlord-friendly state is a state that's more friendly when it comes to the eviction process. So if you do get a squatter, you can probably get them out of there in 30 days or less, and it's a lot easier on your finances where you're not essentially having to cover that mortgage while they sit there in your property rent free.
So, how long can a person actually dwell in the home before they're considered a squatter?
That really depends on the state. That's very hard to answer. It really just depends on what state that you have your properties in. Every state is different.
So, in addition to the landlord friendly state, it seems like you also need to make sure the time period because if you're going to put your home on a listing, maybe not allow people to stay getting close to that time period. Would you agree?
Yep, I would agree, just to prevent that from happening to you. But also, you have to do your homework. If you're going to do Airbnb, but you're not buying properties in a conservative manner, then you really might want to stay out of non-landlord friendly states.
For those people who want to do maybe short term, what type of real estate opportunities are there for people who want to get passive income?
Well, for those people, they can always consider investing out of state. Now, that is also depending on some states because what I've seen is that some states are considering not allowing out of state investors. Dallas, specifically, is one of them. And not gonna lie, on the investor side, I was a little happy when I heard it because I was like, "That's less competition for myself." I would say look outside of that state.
I want to go backwards just for a second. So, we're talking about Airbnb, and Airbnb was founded on the sole purpose of helping people with minimum budgets be able to have affordable housing for short periods of time. But it seems as though lately the supply of homes is low, which means the prices can now all be inflated. It seems like now when I go on Airbnb, it is so hard to find affordable rentals. Don't you think that's kind of ironic?
That right there leads into the point that I made earlier is that in a recession, people are just not going to pay for this. They're not going to pay for Airbnb. So if you didn't buy it conservatively, you now don't even have the option to turn it into a long term rental property because you overpaid for the property. With that being said, I personally feel like people who was new to it, who didn't know any better, who just bought a property because they said, oh, the numbers work right now in the current market that they're in, they didn't think about the downside. I think that a lot of those properties could end up, on the market because of a short sale or getting foreclosed on.
So, what do you mean by short sale?
So a short sale is when you owe more than what the property is worth. So the bank has to take a loss essentially by selling the property for less than value.
So, is that the same as a foreclosure?
That is you saving the actual property owner from foreclosure.
Okay, so speaking of banks, something I've noticed is that banks and other corporate entities are buying these short term rentals. I think that's more problematic than your everyday person going out there trying to buy short term rentals because the everyday person only has so much capital. Banks and other corporate entities have a large surplus of income. So, do you think they're really the ones contributing to this whole housing issue that we have right now?
I think they are because people forget that banks and hedge funds and all these here, big companies, they're still ran by people, meaning they're subject to error. What I'm saying when I say that is that they can jump onto a trend just as quickly as anyone else can jump onto a trend. I mean, look at what they did when it came to crypto.
I'm not here to bash the Airbnb model because personally, I love Airbnb as the person who's renting. I've stayed in one in Australia, Spain, Germany. I've stayed in one basically all around the world, including East Africa. I personally like the opportunity to stay with the locals. But like I said, although I love it, as a whole, it seems like it's becoming problematic because what would be considered your local areas are now becoming overpopulated with tourists. And so it is raising up the rents or it's rising up the mortgages.
Well, that's turning this nation into more of a renter's nation. What I mean by that is only a few people are going to own property and everyone else is just going to have to rent, which could potentially be a bad thing.
So do you think the market would ever cool off where it'll correct itself, where there'll be a balance of mortgage owners and renters?
Honestly, none of us have a crystal ball, so it's really hard to predict that. But I do think that maybe it could possibly cool off. I've been listening to some talks, and they were stating that as far as when it comes to apartment investing and apartment rents, actually, that if things get too tight, then we would have to just stabilize rents versus what we've been doing the past year.
Okay. Hotels pay taxes, right? They have the hotel tax. And then you have the real estate property taxes. But with Airbnb, they're considered the sharing economy like Uber. So they've been guilty of not having to pay those taxes. So not only are they outside of those zoning areas, they haven't had to pay those taxes. So now it seems like most of these cities are now imposing those taxes because they are saying, no, you're still technically allowing people to stay here. So you should technically pay taxes just like the hotels and just like the regular investors in real estate. So what are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts on that is Atlanta charging 8%. They need to hike it up a little bit more.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You have to live in the city of Atlanta in order for you to qualify for an Airbnb rental to be able to rent it out. Did you know that Airbnb has not been profitable since the inception of the company?
Yes, I did hear about this here. And that's pretty risky for the person who's doing short term rentals, simply because if Airbnb was to go out of business, how would people know about your short term rental? So it makes your entire strategy very dependent on a platform still being around.
Yeah. I think they are now at 80 billion in terms of their valuation, but I think they've lost millions of dollars. They say the majority of their money is going towards marketing. So that's really where the shareholders' money is going, is to marketing. It's not actually to their pockets. So it could actually be that they go under. And so that is pretty risky for people who are invested on their platform. Now, I'm not sure about Verbo or any of the other companies, but I know Airbnb itself is a company that is considered high risk because of that. So that is something that you should consider if you are deciding to strictly list on Airbnb as a short-term renter, is that you may not be able to have that listing put up for long if Airbnb does indeed go out of business. So
Yeah, I definitely recommend that, having a backup plan.
is there anything else that people need to know about how short-term rentals are currently impacting the housing market right now?
I would say that it's impacting the housing market because if you think about it, a person who's doing a short term rental, they can pay a little bit more than the person who's trying to buy their first home, and really they can even pay all cash depending on the caliber of investor they are. So that automatically makes it an unfair advantage for a person who's looking for an actual home to live in. For me, that's really the only issue that I have with it. Is that it's really eliminating the ability for the common person to have home ownership here in the US.
Do you think there's a possible solution for this short term rental crisis?
Yes. What I'm thinking is the way Atlanta is doing things, I 100% agree with it. And I think that more states should do the same. And that will help cool it off some.
So there you all have it, the dark side of Airbnb short-term rentals. But it's not exclusive to Airbnb because you also have Verbo and you also have some other parties that do short-term rentals. It's just Airbnb seems to be the one that everybody seems to know about. They're like the poster child for short-term rentals. So we thought that we'd mention them because you can find more data on Airbnb than you can for the other sources. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think short term rentals should be banned or do you think they should be better regulated? So that is all I have for now. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, consider subscribing. If you are new, welcome. Please share this episode with a friend. And that's all I have for now. Until next time, I will talk to you later.